All right, I think we can get started.
Okay,
So,
great.
great. Good morning, good evening, everyone. We can get started with our session today. So, our session today is with Catherine Rogers, and the topic is up on the screen, and it has been sent out in advance. And the fact that all of you are joining means this is definitely of interest to you. I want to just quickly do some housekeeping things first. As always, please ask your questions in the chat window and we'll get to them by the end of the conversation. If you are not already a member of the Longevity Lab, consider becoming one. It's free and it's pretty informative with a number of different experts that have themselves joined to answer some of your questions. So click on the link that we'll put in the chat window or scan the QR code. Our speaker for next week is Mayank Batwal. He's the CEO of Aditya Birla Health Insurance. And the reason I wanted to talk to him, I mean, unlike all our other experts, what makes Mayank different is he's in the business of insurance. And for an insurance company, the ideal customer is one who's really healthy and pays their premiums, because then they never have any claims. And so if there is one stakeholder in the ecosystem who's interested in keeping everyone healthy, it's your insurance company. And while that's always been true, practically we haven't seen many insurance companies really do much about keeping us healthy. Mayank and his entity have now started doing some pretty interesting things that reward people in terms of discounts to their insurance premiums if they are willing to live a healthy lifestyle. And so, while we talk about the importance of health from a longevity, from a health span perspective, this conversation will be almost from the viewpoint of the economics of being healthy. It is cheaper to be healthy than to be not healthy. So next week's conversation should be interesting. Well, on to today's expert and someone I'm really excited about having joined the podcast, the community podcast, and that's Catherine Rogers. And I spoke to Catherine about a few months back. In fact, the introduction was made by a common friend, and it was a very, very intriguing and frankly exciting conversation, because the one topic where I've not heard anyone say that it's actually optional is Alzheimer's. We've talked, there's a lot of conversation about, is diabetes optional? Is it reversible? And that there is now more and more belief that that's true. But with Alzheimer's, that's not been a topic that has been discussed as much. And I know when I sent out this note, the number of people who sent me personal messages saying, oh my God, this is something that has impacted me personally, because my family, my dad, my aunt, my sister has succumbed to it. And so I'm very keen to hear what the latest and greatest on this topic is. And so without further ado, Catherine, welcome to the community podcast.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Catherine's bio is up there. It's a very, very condensed bio because you have to fit it all in one page. The actual accomplishments that Catherine has had has been pretty phenomenal, and you can always go and check that out.
Yeah.
But I want to sort of start, Catherine, with the question of, what has been your motivation to go down this path of dedicating your life? I know you've been doing it for a long time. What made you get into this?
Well, it's very shocking to see, and I'm sure a lot of people who are attending today, when you see loved ones die, you start to ask, how does that happen? And I then saw a podcast like this. I saw a doctor in the States talking about helping her. She helped babies that were born prematurely. She helped them in the labs to develop their brains. And her husband, who was her accountant, started developing dementia. And she suddenly had this eureka moment. Why don't I do for him what I did for my husband? And basically what she did for the babies was use something from breast milk, which is the equivalent of MCT oil, medium chain triglycerides. And her husband, his cognition got better. Now that got my attention. And it was also connected to a podcast with Dr. Bredesen, who, when I wrote a book, and when I first wrote the book, I said, he said you could reverse dementia. And I saying, well, it wasn't proven. And then just after I published the book, about 3 months later, my book was out of date for the best reason ever. He's documented this in a book that he's written. They reversed 100 cases of Alzheimer's. In other words, people's cognition got better. That has never happened with any of the drugs. The drugs slow it down, and there's lots of side effects, but it doesn't get better. And he has just had another clinical trial that's due to have the results published, and I can give them to you to share with the community, where they're phenomenal results for getting people's cognition back. So to answer your question, my why is my family. Oh, you're muted now, I think.
Sorry. Yes. No, I think that's absolutely in some sense, the greatest motivation to pursue something, because then it's not a thing that you do for a few weeks or a few months and then get disillusioned when you don't have progress. When it has affected someone you care about, you go at it for as long as you need to. And so once you went down that path, so when you started, you heard this podcast, you started getting into it, but you were new to this area, right, Catherine? How did you start like immersing yourself into it to get to the point that you are at today? I mean, time, of course, is one aspect, but what other aspects?
So I read all Dr. Bredesen's books. And if I was going to recommend one book to anyone who is remotely interested, it's called The First Survivors of Alzheimer's. And it's 7 stories, and it's very readable, of people who have undertaken what he suggests people should do and recovered their cognition. It's inspiring, but it also shows that it's multifactorial and very individual. And so it's an excellent preamble to then looking at doing other things, because it makes you appreciate whether you want to do anything or whether you have the inclination to do the protocol. And so you asked what I became a patient. The reason I became a patient is because I realized I have an APO34 gene, which can increase the risk of getting dementia by about, I think it's 33%, and a 4/4 is 66%. But I want to be really precise here. Both of those genes may increase the risk, but you have to turn them on. And I read an article in the Times newspaper where the journalist, who clearly hadn't done the research, she wrote, you have got a 33% increased risk if you've got the 3/4 and a 66% if you've got a 4/4. This is just not true. One sentence should have been written after that: if you turn the gene on. And I'm sure we'll talk about how they're turned on in this podcast now.
Yeah, so that's something I just want to highlight for members of the community. What Catherine just spoke about are the ApoE3 and ApoE4 genes, and you carry 2 copies. And so if you have a 3/4 combination versus a 4/4 combination, so there is a genetic aspect to Alzheimer's. But I think the other key point you made, Catherine, is that you have to have that genetic mutation, and then B, you have to have a switch that causes those to turn on.
And another really important point: you can get dementia, which is cognitive decline, without those genes. Because if you do things that cause your brain to defend itself, it's, you know, some people who got the APO gene do not get dementia. And people who haven't got the gene do get it because of, I mean, I can list them things like glycotoxicity, having a very sugar, carb heavy lifestyle. And the brain will defend itself against that. They're now calling dementia the type 3 diabetes.
Right. Right.
And also you could have something like a toxic load. So that is, I mean, I could talk about that for a week. Toxic load could be anything from exposure to glyphosate, exposure to mold, exposure to a biotoxin. It's anything that means that your body, and then in particular your brain, if these things go across the blood-brain barrier, your brain defends you, looks after you. And what it does, it will shut down parts of the brain in order that you can still walk and eat.
Yeah.
They're not, you know, they don't know which part it would target, but it definitely, when it has exposures and it affects the brain will defend itself.
Yeah, and there's a very interesting analogy to what you just said, Catherine, to breast cancer. I mean, breast cancer has the BRCA1, BRCA2 mutations. And the interesting statistic that is a parallel to what you spoke about is if a woman in general has a 12% lifetime risk of breast cancer, even if you don't have that mutation. If you have that mutation, there's a 72% chance of getting breast cancer. However, having said that, out of every 100 women who get breast cancer, 90 of them did not have the BRCA1, BRCA2 mutation. Right?
Exactly.
And I think that's a very critical point, that having it might increase the probability, but it needs to be turned on. But not having it doesn't mean you're not going to get it, because there are a lot of other non-genetic components. And in fact, the non-genetic components, both for breast cancer and for Alzheimer's, is actually significant. And so very often people do these genetic tests and then they say, well, I don't have that mutation, so I'm fine.
Yeah.
And that's not a good assumption at all.
Yeah. So I just would like to tell the audience there's an amazing guy, I think he's in Taiwan, called Kevin Tran, and he's set up something called the Phoenix Community. And he's a 4/4, and he's using AI, which is incredibly valuable in getting people with 3/4 and 4/4 genetics uploading what's worked for them. And he's producing data from that. And it's in its infancy, but if anybody's interested and they've got the gene, that's a very specific way of looking at how you would not turn it on. Yeah,
and that's a great resource. Catherine will make sure to add that into our show notes.
Yeah.
There's a link to Kevin's page. I remember you talking about it in the past, and that's in fact, I know it's a little bit of a diversion, but I want to go down this path. There are lots of important topics for us to still talk about, but I do want to bring up the topic of AI. You said Kevin is using AI, and so what is your view, Catherine, as you have been going down this path, and now there is this new AI, power that has come into the picture? How do you end up using AI as you go about doing your work?
So I'll give you a practical example, and also some really good news. I had a brain scan in 21 and 24 because I didn't want to do this process of changing lifestyles and doing all the interventions that we will talk about without any proof. I'm not going to do this stuff if I don't have any proof. I'm very data driven. It's not woo-woo. And the good news, I'll come back to the brain scans, is now you wouldn't have to do this. There's now a 3 blood tests, one in particular for p-tau17, that you can do that will tell you if you're producing plaque. So you don't need a spinal tap or a brain scan. I can give you the resource for that. This is such good news. This is like having a HbA1c test for diabetes. It's incredible. It's only been available since April, but in 21 and 24 they didn't have it, so I've got 2 brain scans, and to get people to compare this is quite difficult, so I've put it into 2 AI models, and it was phenomenal. And I checked it in 2 different ones, and I've also then checked it with a radiologist, a neural radiologist, and it was correct. So if you've got 2 very complicated results and you want results and you're trying to track improvements, I've had great success in having an answer that I was satisfied with.
So to understand what you said, Catherine, you did a brain scan in 21, you did a brain scan in 24, and then you actually compared the 2 scans using AI, and for you, and what was the response it gave you? What the progression of something was, or what was the?
Well, a slight improvement in grey matter, but they don't quantify it, and also no signs of dementia, which was confirmed. So what it did to me was whatever I was doing wasn't doing any harm.
Yeah, no, that is fascinating. I'm just thinking to myself, when someone is told that their HbA1c is high, they're told, sometimes they're told, try and fix it through lifestyle.
Yeah.
But how do you know you fixed it through lifestyle? Well, you go in for your next test and your HbA1c, if it improves, it's better.
Yeah.
But now,
you'll be able to do that with the p-tau17. I mean, the Dr. Bredesen, who talks about this, he said over 60, he does his every 2 years. He recommends people to do it from 40, 45 every 5 years. So you would pick up if you're glycotoxic, or you had a toxic exposure, or you had hormonal, what we call hormonal imbalances, trophic loss, which of course is massive in women in menopause.
Yeah. And what is the p-tau test a single number, or what is the outcome? I've never actually done that.
It's a single number, and it's got an optimal range.
Okay. And so were you able to see, as the brain scan showed improvements from 21 to 24, did the p-tau test also show?
Well, remember, my brain scan was 24 and the tests only came out April 25.
Oh, I see. So it's very, very recent.
Yeah, so I would do a p-tau in April 26 because I'm curious.
Right.
And see if I'm still not producing it. And I won't have the expense of a brain scan. I'm all for saving people money.
I do so many tests on myself, but I've never done the p-tau test. Now I can't wait to go get one, because again, that longitudinal aspect of doing it every couple of years and looking at what's happening, and as importantly, what can you do about it? I keep making changes to my lifestyle, and I try and see how it shows up in these various parameters. Now there's one more parameter, and probably the only one to do with the brain, because none of the other blood parameters.
No, I mean, there's spinal taps. It's quite unique in this area, and it's very recent. Really good news for people who, it can flag something up, and then you go and investigate.
Yeah, I think this is really good. I think this is educational for all of us. So if you now go to the point about lifestyle interventions, Catherine, what were the ones that you have seen have the biggest impact, and which are the ones you have integrated into your life because you've seen?
So that's quite a difficult question, because I've done everything. However, because it always depends on what's causing it, so it's functional medicine, what is causing it. For one person, it could be very different to the next, but there are some absolute basics. And you'll all know what they are because you're attending a health webinar. It's sleep. It's exercise, which in particular for the brain, the BDNF, the brain neurotrophic factors that help the brain keep the synapses going. So there's exercise, sleep, and diet. And the one that I've seen the most success, because I now work as a health coach, is if people are glycotoxic. They're eating too many carbs, and every meal they don't quite get there without having a snack, or when they have the plate is there and the plate is full of carbs, and there's not enough protein and fat. That change in the diet, it clears brain fog. It helps people get back to doing what they were doing before, because their body is metabolically compromised.
Yeah.
So that those three things, those lifestyle things. But you could go into great detail about, having an infrared sauna that would, if you had toxic load, which not everybody would have, would help you sweat. For example, I had a really bad problem with mold. And I've reduced the mold load in my tissue, not only by doing binders, but the most important thing with mold, I have to say this straight off, is remove from the source. You can't take a load of binders and still be living in it. If anyone tells you that, they're wrong. You have to remove yourself or remove the source. So you could do that. There's some quite complicated things like V lights that you can put up your nose that give the brain energy, and that's all within the Apollo protocol that Dr. Bredesen, he's written an amazing book called anyway, Google his books. The most recent one, which is really easy read. The first one wasn't, it was too technical. He does go through the options. But I would start with those three basics, especially the sleep, because it cleans the brain.
Yeah. In many ways, this goes back to the point you made earlier. All those same three factors are the ones that people talk about for type 2 diabetes. And that's why this is called type 3 diabetes, because the root cause is very, very similar.
So the difference with dementia, as I see it, and remember, I'm only a health coach, and it's as I see it, because I work for doctors, is type 2 diabetes is very simple. It's your blood sugar. What you'll know someone fit, healthy, eats well, sleeps well, and then they get dementia. And that's when the toxic load comes in. And the patients I end up working with mostly are the ones that have a toxic load, and the tests that the Apollo recall code method, it tests for, if you've got high inflammatory markers, and if you have, it will then drill down, is it glyphosate, is it mold, is it biotoxins? And the one I'm really interested to see, and I'm not sure they're quite there yet, is to see, and it will be, AI will make it very simple. If people aren't detoxing, they need to know. And you'll know that if you have a simple gene test and you whack it in Nutcracker or something that analyzes it, you don't need to go to a gene specialist. You just ask AI, and because it's factual, it's not a worry with AI. You say, have I got a gene that means my detox is compromised? And then you would really concentrate on making sure you sweat, taking, I can't, because I'm not a doctor, I can't recommend it, but you go, taking binders or whatever. For mold, I can say what I took cholestyramine, and the mold definitely would have affected my brain, 100% sure, because I also have an HLA access where I don't detoxify. I go in a sauna 4 times a week. And the mold exposure is very interesting for me, because I think people, I get looked at like I'm nuts, completely balmy. What's the problem with mold, But mold, it lives in your body, and microtoxins go across your blood-brain barrier, and your brain will defend against it. And there's a very, very simple, cheap test, and I'll give you the link, from survivingmold.com. It's a VCS test. It's a visual contrast sensitivity test. It's $18. And it will, when you take it, the person who used it in over 10,500 patients, Dr. Schumacher, who worked in mold and biotoxin area. There's a very high correlation, it's over 95%, between people who've had an exposure and failing this visual contrast sensitivity test. I failed that for 3.5 years, and
Wow.
I've just started passing it. And that really has been my yardstick for my toxic exposure, my mold exposure. Rather than keep on going back for really expensive lab tests, is to use a cheaper test. And as a coach, that's sort of my job. But the doctors say what you have to do, and I'll sort of say, well, you could actually, just do it via this test, because it's a feedback mechanism that you are improving.
Yeah, Catherine, I have a question on mold. I mean, you see a lot of clients, patients. How would you tell by looking at someone, by talking to them? Is there a blood test? How would you know that mold could be a problem, or any of the other environmental toxins?
Okay, so you can do a urine mold test, but I would say it's a waste of money, because you could eat mold in your food. You could have a blue cheese. Mm-hmm. There's another one that's a tissue test, and can I send you a link to it, because they've just changed the name to it.
Okay, sure.
And there's a phenomenal, I'm going to have to flick me off the screen for a minute. There's a phenomenal Facebook page which has every resource you need to know about mold. I'm just going to get the name for you now so people can have a look. Of course, Americans spell it without an U, don't they? Toxic Mold Answers, Functional Medicine. And the guy has put so many small little videos on there, which anybody who suspects they might have mold in the house and then they want to know how to deal with it. There's something like 256 3-minute videos on there.
Oh.
It's a phenomenal resource.
Got it. We will make sure to add those.
Yeah.
In terms of the exercise, right? You spoke about exercise being a critical element, and you referred to the brain-derived neurotrophic factor as a
That's
key.
quite a mouthful.
BDNF. I know there's been a lot of research that has shown how exercise really works very, very well to reduce the probabilities of many of these neurodegenerative diseases.
Yeah, for sure.
What is the exercise protocol, Catherine, that you recommend to people?
Okay, so because I don't want people to be stressing and getting higher cortisol, which of course can affect the hormones that then can cause trophic loss, I recommend 4 times a week of half an hour of weight training, and with progression, and then some sort of cardio twice a week. But that's your sort of cardio. If it's for you, it's a quick walk. For someone else, it might be a run. Someone else, it might be a bike. But I know personally, when I started that regime, my bone density went up and my muscle mass went up by 1 kilogram. And,
Wow.
and the muscles are so important to maintain. I know I'm 64, and it's so important. I know a lot of people, but I'm just saying, you asked me about myself, it's so important to maintain muscle mass.
Yeah, and in what you just said, Catherine, there is a very important takeaway, and that is, until about 5-10 years back, people rarely spoke about, when the conversation is about exercise, it used to be about cardio, and it is about, like run and do stuff. But for many people, that's not doable. Now, the new direction over the last 5-7 years seems to be more down the path of strength training, because of the impact on bone density and muscle mass, and then cardio, even if it is zone 2.
Yeah.
Right. That already adds. Now, if you can do zone 4 and zone 5, even better, but zone 2 already adds a lot of value. And an interesting statistic is that even the best athletes in the world, the Tour de France riders and the marathon runners, when you look at their training schedule, 80% of their training is zone 2. You would have imagined, these sprinters and these Tour de France bicyclists must be going at zone 5 a lot, but they actually don't. They train mostly at zone 2. And if all of us can just do zone 2 and strength training,
Yeah.
to your point, I think we are already going to make an impact across the board.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
Catherine, the question that comes to my mind is men versus women. Does Alzheimer's impact?
So the stats I've seen is 3 times more women get Alzheimer's. And I understand this is because of the loss of estrogen. There's so many estrogen receptors in the brain, and the doctors I work with, when we have women, we do encourage BHRT.
And
Because
just for everybody's sake, just so that everybody knows, BHRT stands for bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. And then I just want to make a quick comment on that, because I think this is a very important element in what Catherine is going to say next. Is for a long time, there was hormone replacement therapy, but the earlier versions used to be, urine from horses and progestin. They were all synthetic, synthetic HRT, but now it is usually bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, BHRT, and that behaves the exact same way as your natural hormones, which as women go through menopause, their risk of heart disease changes dramatically. Until the time they are pre-50, pre-menopause, their risk of heart disease is actually lower than men. After 50, because of the loss of estrogen, it is way worse than men. And it seems to be true also for things like Alzheimer's. And so if you are someone who is in the menopause age group, you should definitely at least have the conversation about HRT, specifically BHRT.
And the other thing that I personally, and obviously I can't recommend it, but I do watch women take HRT or BHRT, and they just do it on how they feel. I feel very strongly, if you're putting something in your body, you should have a blood test. So when you start taking it, 6 months later, what happened to the estrogen and progesterone? Did it have any effect? Because you can feel fab on too much testosterone, but it's not doing you any good. Right. And I know, in the UK, the actual blood testing isn't always done. It's done on how you feel, which to me, I just couldn't contemplate doing that. It wouldn't feel very safe.
Yeah. And I think the same thing is also true for other areas. For example, with heart disease, we all know heart disease is asymptomatic, which means you could be having it and we don't know it. But yet, you're not asked to do any tests, deeper tests, unless you show symptoms. And so that does not reconcile.
Yeah, so it's more about being preventative, because if you have a low nutrient status, if your diet has a low nutrient content, or you're exposed to toxins, that could be going on for years, and that will lead to neurodegeneration. And one of the things that Dr. Bredesen said is, everyone has these colonoscopes when he said, I wish everyone would do a cognoscope in their 40s. So test the brain, and then they'd know in their 50s if anything they were doing was impacting it. Well, I mean, the p-tau17 would do that now. Maybe you don't have to do, because the Apollo blood tests are quite extensive. You're right, it's silent. Alzheimer's is not something or dementia, when you go to the doctors, and I can only speak in the UK, and you've got mild cognitive impairment, that's like, it's described by Dr. Bredesen as a metastasized cancer. I mean, that is dementia that's been growing for 20 years because of whether it's inflammation, glycotoxicity, vascular. Some of them, like traumatic head injuries, is very different. And you see that in the American football players. Because it's silent.
Yeah. You bring up traumatic brain injuries, concussions, which was an example of that. has that shown to be something that you can deal with? I know there is a lot of new research that shows creatine as a supplement is very helpful.
I don't have any experience. I think on this the trial that's coming out in the new year, they had one person and they've managed to improve some cognitive areas. So that would be an interesting one to read. But I personally don't have any experience of improving a MoCA score. And to explain what a MoCA score is, hopefully you and I are a 30 out of 30. When you first have a patient, you do a simple cognitive test, and it's things like counting down in sevens from 100, drawing a clock face, naming animals, all that sort of thing. And the trial is showing that their cognitive ability increases. Not only in that one, that's one example of the cognitive test that used. There's an amazing piece of software called Brain HQ, I think written by Harvard, where it stimulates your brain and it shows you how you increase in, say, being able to assess shapes, spatial awareness, being able to recognize faces. And by doing the exercises, you see how you improve. And I found that really good with patients because they get encouraged.
Right.
I can send you that resource as well.
Are there any games or puzzles, Catherine, that you do?
Oh, you see, the thing is, I don't know, because the Brain HQ is so well researched and it's been used extensively. They've shown that, because then they test you. So you do it every day and then you test you. So I'm not going to, sorry, I can't really, maybe people know anecdotally, well, I did that a lot and I felt like I was sharper.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you one thing that I've found really challenges my brain is there's a puzzle in the New York Times called Connections, and anybody anywhere can play it. And I find initially when I started playing it, I was like, I just don't get it. Effectively, there are 16 words, and you have to make 4 groups of 4 each, and there is some connection between the 4 words in a group, but it's not obvious. And it really taxes your brain. And I remember feeling almost like mentally exhausted every time I did it. And I got most of them wrong. But then over time, you can see how your brain is beginning to start doing a better job of making those connections.
Yeah.
And now I get more of them right than I get wrong. But it's still something that I can make out is taxing my brain, which some other puzzles I'm in autopilot. I don't think I'm really using my brain much. It's fun, but I don't feel that cognitive load.
And for sure, you're only using one part of it. The thing about the Brain HQ, it's divided into 6 areas of your brain.
And what are those areas, Catherine?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's things like spatial awareness, numbers, facial recognition. Because when you've got a MoCA score of 22 out of 30, you're challenged on some of those. And so it shows that when you do it, they improve.
And so when you get a score of 22, those 8 points you lost, does it become very clear which aspect, and then they test you more or they train you more on that aspect? Okay.
Yeah.
And this is an app on the
you can buy it, Brain HQ.
Brain HQ. Okay, great. We'll make sure to put a link to that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I know. Gosh, there's so many things to talk about. Yeah. I think the toxic exposure is the one where you need help. I think the simple, straightforward things you can, everybody knows, to some degree what manageable exercise is. Diet, maybe you need a bit of assistance, but for sure you can get hold of one of Dr. Bredesen's book, or I have a piece of software. You have access to things that you can just put in what you've got, how you eat. I have a piece of software called resetyourhealth.com, and you just get 4 weeks worth of recipes that could set you on the track of eating properly. Not properly, that sounds really judgmental. Eating great for yourself in a way that you want to eat that's manageable. Because I know eating is such a, because I did mental health for so many years, I'm very sensitive to all the triggers around diet.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we didn't talk much about sleep. We referred to it, but is there anything about sleep, Catherine, that when you think about providing feedback to people, to clients on how to manage their sleep better? Because it's one of those things, just by trying harder, you can't sleep better.
Well, I mean, I think it's probably something that you have to set up during your day. So you're not manically on a computer till just before you go to bed, you're off your screens, you've done some exercise, but it's not just before you go to bed, you've eaten well. I think if you manage those three, there's no way your sleep can't improve. And then you might find magnesium just before you go to sleep would help, or if you're menopausal, some progesterone take just before you go to sleep. Making sure all the windows are dark. And that it's calm where you sleep, but they're all freely available on the internet. I mean, they're not rocket science. I think where the Apollo approach, or the approach that I've used, is to look at toxic load, which is the ones where it's not, the advice isn't as freely available, and you really have to dig deep.
How prevalent are things like mold and other toxins in one's environment? Is it a 5% problem, or do you find that almost 80% of the people who come in to talk to you?
Oh God! So when there's a filter by the time they come to me via a doctor, and I would say these people are very highly motivated. They mostly are the partner of someone who's got dementia, or the child of someone who's got dementia. So again, it's family motivating them. And therefore, I can't tell you the percentage of the population, but just Google how many people get dementia. And then if you think, that's such a hard question. I don't think I can answer it, apart from saying the ones we see are the ones with toxic loads mostly.
Got it. In fact, one of the questions has been, what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia?
So Alzheimer's is specific to a sort of genetic profile, and dementia is a catch-all, because that's what I said at the beginning. You can get dementia. In fact, an exact answer, I've got a web page called Reset Your Brain Health, and that's got 2 really good paragraphs on the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia. It really doesn't matter, because the approach to treat them is the same. You find out what's causing it.
And then another question from the community is, Parkinson's, like Alzheimer's, is also progressive neurodegenerative disease. Are there lessons from Alzheimer's applicable to Parkinson's?
100%. If Dr. Bredesen and Dr. Schumacher, who they are all saying they're finding a lot of correlation between toxic load and Parkinson's, especially with glyphosate loads. The research is ongoing, but if you did the same approach, I mean, they're trying to set up a separate area where they can test patients for exactly that reason.
Got it. I mean, it sounds like the root cause for almost any of these things is the same, and so if you just focus on fixing the root cause.
Yeah, the root cause isn't the same when it's toxic load, though, is it? If you think about it, because one person wouldn't live in mold, but they might have a biotoxin exposure. I'll share something really personal. I had mold, I got rid of it, I ripped my house apart. I could show you that, in this room I'm in, we had wind coming in, going on to horsehair in an old house. So you had wet, humidity, and organic matter. That's all mold needs. Wet, something damp, humidity, and organic matter. And because we heat the house and we had horsehair in it, we got mold. So I got rid of all that. And then I did a particular test that's from something called the SIRS protocol. And it showed I had a biotoxin exposure of poop. And I just said to the practitioner, I said, no way, I have not got a poop exposure. That's not happening. And she said, okay, well, you know. So I had an environmental person come out, and they tested, in England we have a cesspit, and they tested the extractor up through the house, and is extracting into the roof above my bedroom. And they'd attached it with a bendy pipe you use in the back of a washing machine, and it was venting into the roof space. So I had a chronic exposure over 20 years of air from a cesspit, which you couldn't smell because by the time it got up there, it was dissipated. But who knew?
Yeah.
So that's why it's very different. It's very different people's exposure.
Yeah. Maybe until about a couple of months back, this sort of just seemed like another story. But I can now tell you my personal mold story. I didn't have one until a few months back, or at least I didn't know I had one until a few months back. I was in my gym and downstairs, and there was some part of the wooden floor that was warping, and I'd seen that warp a million times, but never thought much about it. And then my wife saw the warp and said, "Hey, this feels like there's water, because water can warp wood." And as we started looking around, we realized that there was some leak from outside the house that was seeping in, because water just finds ways to get to various parts of the home. And under the mats, or the gym mats, there was mold growing. And it had been a long time, but we didn't know about it. And so we could always be, we were exposed to it for all these years, just never knew about it. And so maybe one of the takeaways really is that try and do sort of an audit of your home.
Yeah. So for 3.5 years on the Apollo protocol, I had high inflammatory markers. I did everything. And I didn't know I had mold in my house. I had it in 6 different places. And one of the most important things about mold remediation is when you remove it, you don't spray it with these toxins. You have an extractor fan. You literally hack it out. There's no wiping mold away. And definitely, I've just done a talk that I could send you a link to. Do not fog. If someone tries to sell you a fogging system to get rid of mold, you will poke the bear. You will make that mold very angry. And I know this because I measured it in my home and I measured it in my body. I then had it fogged, and 6 months later, both were worse. And I got my money back.
No.
Yeah.
Another question, Catherine, are wearing masks during exercises safe in gyms, or can they become toxic? And until what time is it considered safe, or prolonged use during exercise is not a good idea, especially in gym? Like, should you be putting a mask on for a long time?
I mean, I've never had any experience. I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. I mean, if you've got a good immune system, then why would you have a mask on? I'm sorry, I'm not. That's a bit outside of my remit.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. I think I see a lot of people wearing masks, and maybe the question that a lot of people have is this really protecting me against mold or stuff like that, or is it not? It's not.
No. Microtoxins are everywhere, and the thing is that we cannot escape it in the modern world. You've got air pollution, you've got glyphosate, you've got other organic chemicals, and we can't. And the one thing we mustn't do about it is stress, because then you get high cortisol, and that affects your hormones. But it's just being aware that around the edges you can do things. Like soaking the vegetables to get off the fertilizer that they sprayed on. Mold, be really aware that if you've got somewhere damp, is it going to dry out, or are you going to get mold because you're then going to get humidity? Yeah, I think it's just I feel like my job at the moment is just raising awareness, just putting a thought in someone's head that they've never had, that maybe just might change the way they do stuff.
Right. Yeah, and I think you've successfully done that. I'm sure a lot of us are now beginning to think I should go check out my house and see if there are any areas that are damp and keep an eye out.
Two sets of mine were behind fitted furniture. One was a leaking drain and the other one was the horsehair. We had to take the fitted furniture out and just literally burn it.
No.
Go on that Facebook page. It's so informative, practical, will save you a lot of money in the long run.
There are all these techniques, NLP, CBT, and you've spoken about them.
Oh, you mean the mental health ones? Yeah.
Mental health ones. Do they? How do they work? I mean, what is the basic concept of CBT? I mean, a lot of people have spoken about it. It's a nice 3-letter acronym, but I don't think most of us know how these techniques work.
I can explain it really simply, and probably every therapist will now kill me. So you have no choice when a thought comes into your head. Everyone's had a thought while I've been talking. Some of you ask questions. Some of you do not have a choice about thoughts that come into your head. It's like a train coming into a station. You are not controlling that. And when those thoughts come into your head, they kick off a feeling, or sadness, happiness, a physiology, racing heartbeat, stress, or a behavior. You get angry or you get sad. So CBT aims to make you aware that you can interrupt the thought, so you then go get the effect on feeling, behaviors, and physiology.
And just for everyone's sake, CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy.
And it's the same. I think when I look at my other disciplines, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and EFT, emotional freedom techniques, they're all about reducing the stress. I mean, emotional freedom techniques are very much about reducing stress. Sorry, someone's just, because I'm on my phone, I'm trying to get rid of these people on the phone. Get rid of them. And for example, I've worked with people who have PTSD with EFT, and they were veterans of the war in Iraq, and there's no way you could have done CBT with them because it's conscious brain. EFT uses a lot of the unconscious brain, and they couldn't go into situations without losing their temper. And EFT is so powerful when people aren't up for therapy. It's mostly male, I don't need it and all that sort of thing, because they have no choice. It just happens because you're accessing the acupuncture points, and at the same time you're not asking them what did you do and what did your father say, which is psychoanalysis, and you're just saying what color is the trauma and changing the color. And EFT is my go-to. I really love it.
I mean, I think that deserves a whole session for itself.
Yeah.
Let me go to a couple of other member questions. Daily magnesium dosage recommendations.
See, I'm not a doctor.
So you can't make recommendations.
Ask AI. But the best one, I can say, the best one for the brain is magnesium threonate. There's lots of different types of magnesium.
Yeah. And the reason you say that's the best, Catherine, is, well, I know there's magnesium glycinate, which a lot of people take as well. But you put threonate as the best from your perspective.
Going across the blood-brain barrier, and that's from the research done from Dr. Bredesen.
Yeah.
And I think if you Google it, they'll list it as threonate is the best one for the brain.
Yeah. Deepa, your question about does Alzheimer's have a genetic component? Those were the ApoE3 and E4 variants. And so the question is, if a parent has it, what are the chances that the children will get it?
So you probably need to test yourself. My father probably had a double one because I've only got a single one.
Yeah.
It's not a given. I know families where 2 of the children have got it and 1 didn't when the parent had it. So it's not a given.
Yeah.
But that is a really good test just to do, because there's all sorts of suggestions when you have those genes to avoid turning them on.
Another question is, we spoke a lot about toxins, air pollution, which is the hardest one to control because that's out of what one can do. How much does that impact the chances of Alzheimer's, and do these air filters, do they work?
Yeah, so there's something like an air oasis or something that's check the filters. I think they're a really good idea if you live in a polluted city, and change the filters in them, because yes, any chemical, and there will be a cacophony of chemicals in cities and in the countryside. There will, be glyphosate from farmers. Yeah, absolutely, that would affect the blood-brain barrier. And some people may detox it really well, but if 25% of the world's population has this the evidence shows they don't detox well, then you have to work on detoxing.
And is that the role of the HLA-27 that you referred to earlier, Catherine? Does that play the role of detox, that gene?
Yeah. I can send you the gene, but you could Google that as well. There's one particular gene that 25% of the world population have that means you don't detox that well. Doesn't mean you can't.
You just don't do it as well.
Yeah, I don't sweat. I didn't sweat. I lived in the jungles of Guyana. I managed a bird watching zoo in, the tropics. I did not sweat. I went to the desert. I did not sweat. My husband sweats in both places.
Yeah.
To me, it was really obvious, and when it was pointed out, to me it wasn't obvious. And then when it was pointed out to me, I'm like, yeah, I just thought I was lucky.
Yeah. There is something to be said about women's physiology versus men's, because a study has shown that when women and men sit in the same temperature in a sauna, men start sweating way before the women do. Right? And then there's a question from Deepan: do people with hypertension have a higher chance of getting Alzheimer's?
So hypertension will be to do with a metabolically imbalance. And remember, I'm not a doctor, so I can't say yes empirically, but it would be a really good idea to pay attention to it. The one that I'm not so sure about being so manic about is cholesterol. I think, cholesterol was fine a few years ago at 7, and now they want it below 4 or something. So I would go to a functional medic if you've got hypertension, and work on reducing it with the basics, with exercise and diet.
Yeah. No, I think that's perfect, and we are out of time, Catherine. So the timing couldn't have been better. So thank you very, very much, Catherine. It was a really engaging conversation. I learned a lot. There are a few things I'm going to go and put into practice right away. Getting the blood test done, for example, and also downloading the app.
Let me know if you can't find any of those links, and I'll get them to you. Yeah,
we'll definitely do that. And on behalf of the community, who I'm sure will show you all their love through their emoji shower, thank you again. And folks on the call, thank you for attending.
Yeah, bye. Thank you. Been a pleasure.